a world within our world. They've created a world unlike any other world.
Dungeons and Dragons. And a game like D&D fuels their imagination and makes them feel special.
The ogre is amused by your joke and allows you to pass.
Dad, I'm just curious. What is it about Dungeons and Dragons that suddenly leapt out at you at age 60?
Dungeons, it'd be the dungeons.
Just what I love about role-playing games is being told exactly what to do.
Me too. You should introduce yourselves.
Hey everyone, you are listening to 93.3 CFRU. My name is Mike, the Birdman, and you are listening to The Spellbook, the show that is dedicated to the tabletop role-playing game hobby. Could be Dungeons and Dragons, could be Cyberpunk, could be Battletech, and the battlefields of the 31st century. But I'm not alone as I trek into the realm of fantasy today, as we specifically visit the far realms, the Feywild, the whatever. Who are you in my house right now?
I am Damien, Magical Hack Morphit. I have stepped out of the umbral forests that are London, and I am currently in the bright and sunny city of Guelph.
Yeah, it is really nice to have you in studio. As you've heard for the last couple of weeks, Damien has been very fortunate to actually join me here in studio. And while we're not recording this at the radio station, we're actually recording this in my apartment, surrounded by many plastic robots. I love Transformers. But yeah, so last week on the show, you heard us talk about dungeon ecologies. We revisited our Arctic prison of Aramasa that was guarded by a white dragon, ghouls, giant spiders, rats. And man, they should never leave us to develop anything in the private prison system, because we will dissolve you and then turn you into a zombie.
Yeah.
Or something. So pretty evil. Go listen to that show if you want to find out those. You can look through the CFRU back catalog or go to our website of thisweekingeek.net, where all episodes plus much more content is available for you. Because in case you listeners didn't know, This Week in Geek is actually one of Canada's longest-running podcasts. It is old enough to drive, it is old enough to buy liquor and pornography at this moment. And soon it will leave the nest and never come home, and never call, and only ask for money. So, on today's episode, I can go on long tangents, whatever. So, today's show is something that I think is kind of implied when you talk about anything TTRPG. And that's about fantasy. Now, we could be talking about the more grounded fantasy of George R.R. Martin, maybe something like mid-tier fantasy like, say, Conan the Barbarian, or high fantasy like Dungeons and Dragons, or even epic fantasy, which is more your Lord of the Rings, maybe even something. Well, I guess you could talk about urban fantasy too, kind of like the Percy Jacksons, the Dresden Files, stuff like that.
There was that one movie with Will Smith, Bright.
Yeah, which is basically as close as we're ever going to get to a Shadowrun movie,
Yeah.
which is really friggin' depressing.
Very much so.
But yeah, so talking about fantasy. So when you think about D&D, we always think of the swords and sorcery, swords and sandals. You know, your barbarian, your knight, like Sturm Brightblade, Tanis Half-Elven, your Elementster, your Gandalf, your Aragorn, whatever.
I can tell that you've been dipping into Dragonlance quite a bit.
I really like that stuff. Like, my Game Master Sam, I gotta send this guy such a huge shout out. So I think I told you this a couple of months ago. So when our DM Sam started doing it for my friends Nick, Peter, and Tom, he dressed up as Rasslin, like complete getup, gold skin, everything.
Nice.
It was like, wow, you didn't have to put in maximum effort, and you did. And it's kind of cool because fantasy is not something I actually grew up with, really. I started fantasy adjacent. I started reading the Anne McCaffrey Dragonflight books when I was in 7th grade.
Okay.
And I didn't get into Dragonlance until probably this year. And my only other experience with fantasy is honestly Lord of the Rings, maybe Legend if you wanted to count that. I've never seen the Warcraft movie. I've seen the D&D movies. and everyone see Lord of the Rings, though I haven't finished The Hobbit. That's a special series of movies we're going to be doing on TWIG during the summer. If you want to go check out our Lord of the Rings episodes with me, Adam, Dave, and Ken, you can go check those out.
The books were better.
Yeah. And my friend Nick has a rather impassioned rant about Tom Bombadil, which is
Nice.
a little scary. But yeah, it's kind of fun. So when I think about fantasy, I thought all fantasy was created equal. I am wrong. Why am I wrong, Damien?
So,
Which I often am.
you know what? And that's fine. Everybody's wrong from time to time. So fantasy comes in multiple flavors. You have your low fantasy. Now, these are going to be things like, honestly, I would put Conan in low fantasy. Because like the magical elements are actually fairly few and far between.
So something kind of like maybe Thieves' World, where magic is more ritual and takes a
Yeah.
really long time to cast? Okay.
Yeah. Then you're going to get into, like, your middle fantasy. That's actually, for the most part, where I would put most D&D campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
Magic is pretty common. It's, it's not something that some commoner sees a wizard casting, a flame bolt or something like that. They're not going to freak out and say, oh, you're part of the devil.
Yeah.
It's the devil.
Would you say that's more Dragonlance because you have to be licensed by the Tower of High Sorcery to be more low or mid fantasy?
I would say that one. So with yeah. Actually, it depends on when in the series you're talking.
Yeah.
So if you're talking at the beginning of the Chronicles, so the seasonal books.
Yeah.
I would put that on the border between low and mid fantasy because
Okay.
at that point the gods are ignoring the world.
Yeah.
It's not that they're gone, they just don't care anymore.
They're just not answering the phone.
Yeah. If you look at towards the end of the series, however, I would put that closer on the scale. Like, it would definitely still be in, like, middle fantasy, but it would be closer to high fantasy than, say, Greyhawk.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you were to look at the Forgotten Realms, that one I would put, again, on the border between mid-fantasy and high fantasy.
Yeah, because I find that vastly depends upon the DM. And when we talk about the different tiers of fantasy, especially when we're talking low, mid, high, and epic, I guess, would be another classification. A really good way to think about this almost might be Final Fantasy, which is a video game series and a couple of specials. I'm not going to get into the weeds with that. But long story short, is your stuff like, if I see someone casting a fireball, am I going to freak out?
Yeah.
It's like, with something like that, I find that flavors the world in very specific ways. Because magic in some games should feel really impactful.
Yes.
Like, unlike, say, something like... Actually, a good example of a low fantasy, yet almost mid, very low to mid, I think Shadowrun falls in there. Because magic... Okay, so to give you folks a very broad overview of Shadowrun works on the idea is that the world exists in cycles. There's the fifth world and the world the game takes place in, which is the sixth world. So basically, to make a very long story short, after 2012, something happened and magic returned to the world. Some creatures, your puppy may turn into a hellhound. Your next door neighbor's kid, you think's going through puberty, may suddenly turn into a troll or an orc. They goblinize. That's introducing fantasy elements into a low magic world. For example, let's say, for the sake of argument here, I'm not calling the Amazing Kreskin out or whatever, but I would call our world right now low magic. Now, I said low, but no, I didn't say no magic, because I don't think it's unfair to say we look at people in real life, and don't look at me crazy when you see me on campus, some people claim to have psychokinetic abilities, like psychics, telekinetics, even pyrokinetics. I mean, hell, we have spontaneous human combustion. in real life. And those are noted cases. You can look them up.
We just don't necessarily know what causes it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's even something, and this is going to be very cool. You can look this up if you want. Google or YouTube remote viewing. And that basically boils down to astral projection. But the reason I bring that up is that's introducing more fantastic elements into a world that doesn't necessarily see it. Sort of like your D20 Modern, for example. So when you do that, that's a very specific type of fantasy. Because now, well, can I magically enchant a gun? Can I throw fireballs or something? And the thing I mentioned was Shadowrun, because it's kind of like a low fantasy setting. When you introduce the fantastic, sometimes the magicians of those world, if they interject technology into themselves, they can't use magic as effectively.
Yeah.
So that's like an urban fantasy, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that over the course of this hour. I guess my question is, as we lead up to our first break in just a couple of minutes here, what makes low fantasy appealing in some ways to you?
So, if I'm looking to play or run in a low fantasy game, what I want out of it personally, and what I'm looking for is that's going to be kind of the whole man versus man struggle trope.
Okay.
Thinking back to like old school like English and writing classes. So you're fighting to survive. You don't have revivify or resurrection to fall back on if you die. If you die,
that's it.
Probably going to be the end. If you get injured, you're probably going to be down for the count for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
You need to heal.
Yeah, because that's one thing I like about low magic settings and low fantasy settings, is it makes combat, in theory, more impactful.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've heard of games like Thieves' World, where healing magic just isn't a thing. Or if you get slashed by a sword, or if you get shot in a game like, I don't know, Deadlands, for example, you may win the gunfight, but you're gonna die from infection or something like that. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the appeal, is like you can make your combat more closer to real medieval fantasy fighting if you want to run. I guess Pendragon might be a low magic setting. Yeah. There's some magic in there, but not a lot. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's more feeding into the Arthurian legend. I mean, yeah, there's still like the Lady in the Lake and Merlin, but they're mythical, so you're not going to run into them. So it's still, magic is not, you're not going to walk down to the magical version of Home Depot, get a thing that casts light.
Yeah.
But you could get alchemical ingredients from apothecaries, but they may be ludicrously expensive.
And that's
harvesting in the wild.
Yeah, that's another thing too. Like The Witcher.
Yes.
I would place that at the border between low and mid fantasy, or like low and mid fantasy, because of the fact that you're a lot of times you're dealing with potions, alchemical mixtures. Yes, there are magical monsters and magic and stuff like that, but as the titular Witcher, you have to balance the magic, which most people fear, with the mundane and the alchemical and the more grounded in realism.
Yeah, because I know last episode we talked about low-level enemies, something like your wolves, your bears, your stuff like that. That's not to say a dire wolf. I think that would fall within low fantasy.
Yeah.
Just a giant friggin' wolf that'll eat you. So yeah, we got a lot more to talk about. We're going to be talking about fantasy tropes today, what makes them interesting, what makes them not so interesting, but what makes them fun overall to introduce into your TTRPG. Once again, you are listening to 93.3 CFRW. My name is Mike the Birdman. That is Damien Magical Hat Morphin. We will be back right here on Guelph Community Radio. This is the Spellbook.
We are Paisley Road Public School with our grade 4 class.
And you're listening to CFRU!
Welcome back to the Spellbook right here on 93.3 CFRU, Guelph Community Radio. I am Damien Magical Hack Morfitt.
Yep, and my name is Mike, the Birdman Ashqui, and over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about fantasy. When we opened up the show, we started talking about low fantasy, stuff like that, and what makes it appealing. I think, I was mentioning as we came out of the break, I like, one of the games I played that's low fantasy is I used to run a podcast with a bunch of friends of mine called These Warriors Are Terrible, which eventually became Terrible Warriors. And we played in Pendragon, which is a game by Chaosium, and that's based upon our Arthurian legend, you know, Lancelot, Sword in the Stone. You get the idea. And I used to think for a really long time, I'm going to hate this. Like, why I don't have my cool abilities. I don't have my paladin aura of whatever. I'm not powerful. But I think that's what makes low fantasy so interesting, is every victory feels earned. You're not just throwing down, oh, I got a level 3 spell slot, time to die, loser.
Well, and so I see what you're saying, but the way I look at it is less I'm not powerful and more I don't come in as being powerful. I have to earn that power. And that feeling of accomplishment, of earning those levels, of earning those abilities is, honestly, is kind of good.
Yeah, like I find with like certain games and certain fantasy elements, when the victories feel more earned, I guess, it makes the power creep feel natural.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big problems with fantasy. And I think that's, for example, my wife Blair doesn't like a lot of fantasy, but she likes Game of Thrones, but doesn't much care for Lord of the Rings. And I've got a theory behind that. I think it's the power creep. Frodo and Aragorn. Frodo is a less competent fighter than anybody in that party.
100%.
Sort of like, why? Sam's he fights better with a pan than you do with Sting.
Yeah.
I will stand for Sam all day. But you look at someone like Aragorn, competent ranger, he's like one of them rangers. And he's good with a bow, he's good with a sword, he's great. But in Game of Thrones, Jon Snow is just as competent.
Yeah.
He's great with a sword, he's a good shot. And even someone like Tully eventually becomes a more competent fighter than, say, Frodo, for example.
Yeah.
Now, why do I compare those two? As you mentioned, those victories are earned. Aragorn has the blood of Numenor, and it's all but spent, blah, 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 blah. He's a badass because he's intended to be said badass.
Yeah.
Jon Snow he's the bastard son of Ned Stark, and he had to earn it. So when he fights the White Walkers, that's an earned victory.
Yeah.
I think. As opposed to Aragorn, who could pretty much just mow through those guys as long as he had like a Valyrian steel sword or whatever. And I think I see why my wife likes low fantasy better. Because again, it's earned. And maybe we'll have to sit down and watch The Witcher show, because Henry Cavill is my crush, and I'm okay with that. And you can quote me on that.
Yeah,
Superman,
Cavill's a
hold
hot
me
man.
tight. But yeah, but now when we start transitioning into mid-fantasy, we've kind of danced around this. And this is where a lot of D&D kind of falls into, through the various settings. Though not every D&D setting is created equal. Mm-hmm. And that's not saying lesser quality. It's what flavor of your coffee do you want.
Yeah.
And I think the setting most people are familiar with, at least most new players since the 2014 rules came in, is the Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms, created by Ed Greenwood, who comes to Guelph a fair chunk. If you follow Six Sides of Gaming on YouTube, local channel, shout out to Tommy, they do some stuff in that. But the Forgotten Realms is I think what most people think of D&D. Magic items are, I would say, uncommon to semi-common.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to get, again, Magical Home Depot, it's probably easy to get a lamp that has the light spell on it. It may cost me a bunch of money, but I could probably get it fairly easily.
And I mean, that also comes down to how you run your D&D game as well.
Yeah.
I myself if I'm running D&D, I like to do, middle fantasy, and I don't generally have magic item stores. So you can't go in and just buy a +1 sword. However, in an item shop, you may find a +1 sword as part of their stock because somebody found it in a dungeon and came to sell it.
Yep.
Or it was an heirloom from some rich family who fell on hard times and needed money, whatever. Potions, find them dime a dozen.
Yeah, because it's easier to gather alchemical ingredients. And one thing I've learned, and my friend Nick gave me this idea, and I thought it was so brilliant. Magic. I know we just talked about it, but what I mean by that is no two spells are created the same. So because more often than not, I play a druid. I cast Cure Wounds. That's part of my kit. A cleric can do the exact same thing. But the spells are the same function. They do the exact same heal, 1d8 damage, whatever it is. But we're drawing upon different sources of power.
Yeah.
As a druid, I'm drawing upon the primeval magic of creation itself. A cleric is drawing upon divinity. So, what is the difference if the spells are functionally the same? Why is this different in fantasy? Well, when you look at mid-tier fantasy, let's say, you're pretty much establishing there is a pantheon of higher beings, whether that be angels, demons, celestials, whatever, but you're also entering the realm of gods, goddesses, demigods. And that's a different type of fantasy too, because again, the druid, to tie this into my indigenous identity, for example, I'm indigenous, I'm very spiritual. I believe in a creator. And again, we're not going to get into the religious aspects of this, but what I mean by that is, when you think about the clerical ability, that god is drawing upon Tyr, it's drawing upon Mystara. But they're two distinct belief systems. So there's the primal magic that just created the world and simply is. There's the divine magic, which literally can involve the everyday person. I can pray to a god, and God might pick up the phone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's something in fantasy, I think that often maybe turns people off. Because you and I were talking about this last night. We were just kind of hanging out here. And we were talking about an anime that you were like, called Goblin Slayer.
Ah, yeah.
And you described it to me as Goblin Slayer is a game of gods being played with dice. And that introduces a new level to the fantasy, which means, do you as the mortal player, more often than not, you're probably mortal, are you acting of your own accord? Are you being manipulated? Where do you decide your fate and destiny?
Exactly. And like, as you know, we've been on this last little tangent here. That's actually another way to kind of divide low, middle, and high fantasy is how much of an influence do the gods have?
Yeah, because like you think about, the gods and, like especially in a game like D&D, you have clerics that can just I have a spell called Commune. I can literally pick up the phone to talk to whatever deity that I want. And that can really upset the power balance. Because now you're introducing fantastical elements like a god with divine intervention. Whereas, going back to Jon Snow, for example, if I want to change the world, I'm going to do it at the swing of a sword and the conviction in my heart. In D&D, yeah, I'm going to swing my mace, my +1 mace, and maybe Tyr gives me an empowered wrathful smite.
Yeah.
At the same time. So that changes your narrative as well. And it's weird. Like, the more we're having this conversation, I'm thinking, maybe I need to back off on some of the magic things in my game. Because I give out magic items, not quite like candy, but I'm willing to give out magic items a fair chunk. But I'm not relying on supernatural things. Like, maybe I should bring the gods into it a little bit more. Not to put the thumb of God down on the board, because if you stat it, they will kill it.
Yeah. At least they will try.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the amount of times I've had players like, I'm going to go to Avernus and go try and kick Zariel's ass. Good luck. But it's something about mid fantasy that it's really easy to get muddled, and you can lose the message of what you're trying to do. Because if magic becomes such an overwhelming and powerful force, because it should be, magic should be the great equalizer between Conan and Gandalf.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Conan can swing a two-handed greatsword and probably take out a dragon if he needs to. Gandalf can hang in the back lines and start throwing spells.
Yeah.
That's the difference. And magic should feel powerful. It should feel wondrous. But the power creep in D&D, the spellcasters often outstrip the martial classes at some point because their toolkit gets so bigger. They've got utility as, I'm a ranger. I've got a bow. That's what I do. Like, okay, cool.
So, now, I have opinions about this.
Okay.
Opinions?
I know, right? Unfathomable.
So, I do get that taken in a vacuum, a 10th level spellcaster in D&D is going to be stronger than a 10th level fighter. However, what you're not taking into account with that is necessarily magical gear and properly given magical gear. Now, what do I mean by this? The spellcaster, yeah, they're going to want magical goodies too, but the magical goodies that you give your spellcaster shouldn't necessarily be combat focused. They should be things like Ioun stones,
rope trick,
jump. Things with like spells like rope trick and jump. Spell storing items. I know you're not a big fan of those.
See, it depends on what they are. I have a player of mine in my game, and yes, I'm calling you out, Jack. They had a dagger that 1d4. What do I care? 1d4 plus 1. Ooh. I love you, Jack. I do, because you're one of my most consistent players. That dagger had 10 charges of guiding bolt. They took out a demon with guiding bolt with a level 1 spell. Game Master Mike did not take this into his equations when he was putting together his thing. And I'm thinking, maybe I should be a little less generous with this stuff. I've also had other players completely hose me on a spell. One spell. Scott, I'm looking at you. It's a spell in a book. I think it's called Ojimbo or something like that. And the spell's called Submerge. The spell functions very, very quickly. I touch one body of water, and I touch another body of water. I can then transport between those things. So sort of like plant walking. So he specifically said, I want to touch the water in front of our barracks. Okay, fine. Is there a bathtub in this airship we're taking? I'm like, no, why? He's like, well, rats. Okay. I'm like, and he kept asking, can he touch water? And I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, I want to make sure I can teleport between these two things. And I didn't read the spell description. So this almost completely tanked my game in the worst possible frigging way. And then he decided to flush my big bad black dragon down the toilet. What do I mean by that? He casts Submerge, and the spell has a 25% chance to take the creature you're casting it on with a saving throw. He burned through all my legendary resistances first. And the dragon got flushed down the toilet and appeared in a washroom in the middle of Baldur's Gate.
See, now, that is a creative use of a spell and a perfect example of one of the things that you can do, and one of the good things about Middle Fantasy is magic is so strong that it can help affect the world, but it's not strong enough that it's going to completely break things.
Exactly. Like, you really have to balance magic and its interaction with your world, because if you don't, you're gonna have maybe a situation you can't narratively get yourself out of easily. But we're going to talk more about this right here on 93.3 CFRU Guelph Community Radio. My name is Mike the Birdman Ashby. That is Damien Magical Hack Morphett. And we will be back to talk more things with swords, fantasies, shields, paladins, and all sorts of weirdness. We'll be right back right after this.
Hi, my name is Jermaine, and I just walked into CFRU 93.3 FM for the first time. Anybody can volunteer to make radio here. For more information, check out cfru.ca.
Welcome back to the Spellbook, right here on 93.3 CFRU Guelph Community Radio. I am Damien Magical Hack Morphett. I am joined by Mike the Birdman Ashway. And we are talking about fantasy as a general trope. We've been talking about some middle fantasy. I think let's
raise the power creep up here.
Yeah, let's go. Let's kick it into high gear. Let's talk about some high fantasy for a minute. Now with high fantasy, the best thing that I can compare high fantasy to, and a lot of people who like TTRPGs also like anime, so that's what I'm going to compare it to. We're looking at something where magic is commonplace. The average Joe on the street can cast basic, household magic, light a small flame, gust of wind, cantrips, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily damaging magic, but magic is a part of everyday life.
Mm-hmm. I would think high fantasy to me, I'm less familiar with anime, but I'm going to compare it to video games.
Man.
Final Fantasy. Most Final Fantasy settings, you can walk into your average store and pick up something like a magic item like a Phoenix Down, which brings you back from the dead. Which, side tangent, if Aerith was killed by Sephiroth, why didn't Cloud just go, oh, well, that's inconvenient, just drop a Phoenix Down on her?
Yeah.
I mean, I have Revivify level 3, and you're dead. That's a 5-minute inconvenience to me. But anyway, I'm sure the Final Fantasy nerds are out there yelling at their computers right now, telling me why I'm wrong. And you know what? You're probably right.
And hey, if you really want to yell at us and tell us why we're wrong on this, you can email us at thespellbookshow@gmail.com.
Exactly. And we'd love to take show topic suggestions. Like, we've talked about sci-fi, we're talking about fantasy today, but eventually we'll get into, like, horror tropes, mystery tropes. I know there are different games out there, because fantasy also crosses many genres as well, like romantic fantasy, for example. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, like with like high fantasy, magic is now commonplace. Heavy-hitting weapons are out there. Monsters are very common. Now, this is something where a zombie is something that everybody's probably going to know about, or skeletons.
Yeah.
Even a lich might be something you would know relatively about. I mean, okay, I thought about this, and I don't like to bring up this particular franchise, only because the creator is a transphobe, and she sucks, and deal with it. But when you look at Harry Potter, where does that fall within the fantasy tropes? Because magic seems, it's hard to practice, and I don't see anything particularly devastating outside of the killing curse.
So
they're more utility than anything else.
What I would classify that specific property, property non grata, I would actually both high and low fantasy. Okay. Now, why I would say that is because really that property is divided into two separate worlds. Okay. The magical and the non-magical.
Okay.
The non-magical does still have some sort of fantasy elements, mainly from the magical world bleeding through. Flying cars, the stupid Whomping Willow thing,
like
that
there
bus.
Are creatures.
There are fantasy and magical elements, but they're not an everyday thing. However, once you take that stupid train at that weird platform and go to your magical school, magic becomes an everyday thing.
So it's almost regional, maybe?
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking, like, because, for example, the property, there's a groundskeeper, and he's responsible for animals. But why are we not hearing about a hippogriff randomly flying through Boston? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, because that's one thing with, like, crossing fantasy and high fantasy stuff. It's like, again, maybe even to use a different property just to get off of this train of thought. Shadowrun, for example. When the world changes in the Ghost Dance of 2012 and Magic Returns, suddenly creatures you may run into devil rats. You may run into creatures in the everyday forest. Like, I think there's they make Sasquatches randomly become real, or Bandersnatches. And again, it changes how the world functions. So yeah, you can go out and hunt this thing with a gun, but there's still a magical creature out there. So it's very interesting when you start to think about, like, high fantasy. Like, because I always thought high fantasy was Lord of the Rings, and I'm wrong. And what I mean by that is orcs, they're not magical, they're just people. Now, maybe you could argue the Uruk-hai because they're created, or they're a different regional variant, and even then the books are a little unclear.
Well, I mean, even then, they're basically just an evolved orc.
Yeah, they're just like a different flavor.
Yeah.
Right? Like mocha versus, I don't know, chocolate chip or something.
Yeah.
But when I think about Lord of the Rings, like I said, I for years assumed it was high fantasy. But I'm wrong, because wizards are remarkably rare. There's Gandalf the Grey, Saruman the White, Tom Bombadil, and Radagast the Brown. So there's like 4 that I can think of. And magic, when Gandalf casts light from his staff, it's considered a big deal.
Yeah, and, like, even still, like, I know they're referred to in the books as wizards, but
they're like divine beings.
Yeah, they're basically demigods.
Yeah, because, like, Gandalf is literally a god. Like, this is something I didn't know until I got into a conversation with my friend Nick, and he started talking about the Flame of Numenor, or Guardian of the Sacred Flame, and I was like, okay, is that just something to sound cool? And then I started reading, and I'm like, Gandalf is the guardian of that. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? You're a god? What?
Yeah,
it's
like
you're some funky wizard dude.
And that's the thing, is each of the quote-unquote wizards that were sent to Middle-earth were essentially guardians of some sort of thing. Now, one of them was lost. One of them turned into a
jerk.
Hippie.
Yeah.
One of them turned into a jerk, yeah.
Yep.
And then there's Gandalf.
Yeah.
But, yeah, like, in that property, like in The Lord of the Rings, magic is very specific to certain beings. Yes, there are some magical items.
Yeah, but they're more considered artifacts?
Yeah,
sort of
like
thing?
the rings, sting.
Swords, maybe.
Yeah, there's a couple of swords, but
the mithril armor, maybe?
I think that's just... It's just a property of mithril. I think mithril, as far as I remember anyway, mithril in The Lord of the Rings is just another metal that you can mine. Yeah. So it may have magic or magic-like properties, but it's still a mundane thing.
Yeah, because like I said, for years, up until, I'm not even kidding, up until this last year when we did the Lord of the Rings trilogy show on TWIG with Adam, Dave, and Ken, I was like, I always thought it was like, oh, magic is so powerful, it's everywhere. It's really not. So what is an example of a high fantasy property? I'll give you an example to start. D&D's Eberron setting. Because it's magical steampunk and magic powers everything.
Yeah.
What are other high fantasy examples? Because you're a lot more well-read than me and well-watched.
High fantasy examples. Okay, so I'm going to dip into the anime well again here. The wrong way to use healing magic. Magic is commonplace, magical creatures. There are things like, magical variants of bears. Demons are everywhere. Things like that. You have another one that is fairly recent. Jack of all trades, party of none. That one was one from last season. Magic, again, it's everywhere.
How would you classify something like Naruto, Bleach, or Naruto, Bleach, One Piece? How would you classify those?
Naruto is... I would put Naruto in middle fantasy.
Okay.
Bleach, I would also put in... Bleach is another one that I would kind of put on the border between middle and high fantasy because of the fact that you have the Soul Society, which is quote-unquote magic is infused in that whole realm. Mm-hmm. Same with like Hueco Mundo and the other little bits of that cosmology. Whereas in the regular world, magic touches it, or like the spiritual touches it, but like you don't see a normal person can't see hollows unless they are touched by them, type deal.
I have a surprise high fantasy. I hope you'll think my example's correct, because I think I've got enough evidence. If this was a courtroom, I could argue this. Dragon Ball Z, the entire Dragon Ball franchise, high fantasy. Here's why. The Kais, they just exist.
Yeah.
King Yemma just exists.
Yeah.
Babidi just exists.
Yeah.
The Demon Realm just exists. So, high fantasy is known. When people die, the soul is a known quantity. So when you go to the Home for Infinite Losers, that is the most clever edit ever.
Yep.
I love how Gods and Mods, or whatever the hell their names are, instead of hell shirts, it's Home for Infinite Losers. I think that's great. But anyway, but you think of the cosmology of the Dragon Ball universe, I think that falls in the high fantasy, because the Supreme Kai, for example, grants Gohan unlocks his ultimate potential via magic. Same with Guru.
So, counter to that, not everybody knows about those, though.
I think people know about the cosmology, though. Somewhat, at
like,
least.
if you look at it, Satan.
Yeah. Mr. Satan?
Mr. Satan, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
He... Even in the actual, like, legit property, not talking about TFS, he doesn't really understand the key powers.
You're right.
Yeah, like, key manipulation and stuff like that is not commonplace. It is amongst the characters that we see because the show revolves around the key fighters and their adventures. It doesn't really pull that focus back to look at the rest of the world, except for during, specific... like tournaments and stuff like that, and you can see the difference in the power levels between the normal humans and the Z fighters.
Okay, I don't know whether it's ever addressed on screen, mostly because they didn't meet until later sagas. And maybe you know more about this than me, because I've never seen the original Dragon Ball. I'm Z, the GT, the Super. That's what I get. But when the Demon King Piccolo existed, people knew he was called the Demon King Piccolo. He was a green... weird-looking dude. But we know he's a Namekian.
Yes.
So, would people in the Dragon Ball Z world, we accept the existence of robots. I don't think Baba the Witch is really known, and nor is Corwin's Outlook.
No.
Like the big tower.
Yeah.
But there are magical people, because I think Goku visits a tribe of indigenous people, and maybe there's some magic there. But we accept the existence of androids, like androids 8 through whatever, and Dr. Gero and the Red Ribbon Army. And I know we're getting into weird.
It's relevant.
Yeah, it's relevant. It's so strange because, like, again, it's not a property you would typically associate with magic. But when you think about it, it's so built into the world. But anyway, guys, we are starting to come up on break here. We've got just a little bit here left in the show. We are talking about fantasy, and we're going to see where the rest of this conversation takes us. So once again, you've been listening to the Spellbook right here on 93.3 CFRU, Guelph Community Radio, which you should always support. If you want to find out more about that, go to CFRU.ca and find out how you can help support local radio. My name is Mike the Birdman. That has been Damien Magical Hack. We will be back right after this.
My name's Peter, and I'm on CFRU, and
You can be too.
Welcome back to the Spellbook right here on 93.3 CFRU, Guelph Community Radio. We're talking about fantasy as a trope. We've been kind of skirting high fantasy here and chatting about that a little bit. We've brought up some anime and whatnot. Now, one of the things that I really like about high fantasy is that's where you get some of the more fun power fantasies.
Okay.
You get your, your powerful wizard throwing fireballs and changing the world around them. Gods and goddesses and other divine beings walk the earth. One could say that Dogma, the
Kevin
movie,
Smith. Okay, interesting.
could fall into middle to high fantasy.
I don't think you're wrong, because we've now established the existence of a divine being who looks like Alanis Morissette.
Yeah.
We've established Loki and Bartleby are literal angels on Earth. And if you've seen the movie, you know where this is going. There's also a great bit out of, if you go look up the scene, look up Loki reboot, and you'll see how when Loki got sent back to Earth, he turns in the Jason Bourne.
Oh, nice.
He calls himself, this is the reborn identity. It's really funny. But yeah, you're not wrong, because yeah, we've now established these divine beings exist, and even the 13th apostle, Rufus, which rewrites the cosmology of what we understand as modern day Christianity.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah, like, that's interesting. Yeah, you know what? I don't think you're wrong, because in Kevin Smith's universe, I mean, okay, even in Jane Silent Bob, Kevin Smith, Silent Bob can summon the Bog Saber.
Yeah.
So by definition, is he an artificer? Silent Bob is an artificer.
Yes.
Arguing. In Mallrats, Jay says, where does he get all those wonderful toys when he has all the abilities to fly through the mall and sees Shannon Doherty, no, not Shannon Doherty, Amy Adams, or what Joey Lawrence Adams naked when he busts through the wall.
Yeah.
Okay. Bong Saber.
Yep.
Iron Bob and Jay and Silent Bob oh my god.
Yep.
I think I just broke Kevin Smith.
Yeah?
That's weird. Thank you for that horrible thought. Okay. What are some other high fantasy properties that maybe I'm missing?
Okay.
Planescape.
Yeah.
Because that's, the Lady of Pain, Sigil.
Warhammer Fantasy.
Okay.
The gods are real. Magic is a known and common quantity. There is in that, if you look at both the miniature and the TTRPG, the winds of magic are a thing. So, like, the winds of magic ebb and flow, so sometimes your magic is stronger, sometimes your magic is weaker. I honestly would even classify Warhammer 40K as high fantasy, as well as, like, gothic sci-fi. Because demons are a thing. Magic, which is considered as, like, psychic powers, but it's magic.
Okay.
Is a thing.
So would Star Wars be considered high fantasy? Because the existence of Jedi, but then they break it down scientifically and say it's midi-chlorians.
That one was added in.
Yeah.
But you know what? Yeah, I would consider. I would definitely consider Star Wars as being on. I would probably put it on the low end of high fantasy.
Okay.
Because while yes, there's a lot of fantastical, magical type elements, it has been somewhat grounded in the mundanity.
Yeah, it's been almost demystified. at times, because, I mean, again, God, I'm letting all my dorkness fly out here.
But I mean, that's the show.
When Darth Vader... I just realized how stupid I sound saying this. When Darth Vader clones Star Killer, you can replicate force powers, and I guess even when Moff Gideon wants to try and get a hold of Grogu. Sorry, you've had like 3 years to watch this show. They want to recreate Force-sensitive soldiers, and even when Palpatine gets reincarnated, somehow Palpatine returns. Get it. Words I can't say, or the station will get fined. It's so ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, does high fantasy always necessarily mean magic, or is it just more fantastical elements?
I think it can be more fantastical elements. I kind of couch it in magic because that's one of the easiest things to quantify, is the level of magic or the level of divine influence in the setting. So again, like getting back to one thing that we'd mentioned earlier, Goblin Slayer. The gods have an effect.
Direct influence.
Yeah, they have an influence on the world. Yeah, magic is limited. Most of your spellcasters in Goblin Slayer, both the game and the anime property, are generally only going to be able to cast 1 or 2 spells per day.
Okay.
But those spells have an impact.
Significant impact.
They have significant impact. They're a known quantity. Magic users are common. Like, a lot of parties
have at least one in them.
Yeah, will generally have either an offensive type magic user or a healer. Magical beasts are common. Like, it's baked into the setting, and that is, in my opinion, kind of one of the more important aspects of the level of fantasy.
I've only started watching this show recently, and I've seen like 6-7 episodes, but I really enjoy it. It's the Amazon Prime show Vox Machina.
Yeah.
That I would consider fairly high fantasy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's basically a D&D campaign turned into a TV show, but...
Yeah, and I was... You know what's weird? I used to not much care for the Critical Role stuff. I still don't care for the live plays. I really don't. Sorry. But I like the setting, and I really like the show. I haven't got into the Mighty Nine yet, though.
Yeah, like, that's one of the things. Like, I am not a fan of most actual plays.
It's hard to find a good one. It really is.
I'm a part of one, and I don't watch them.
Yeah, same here. When a little bit of lore drop here. So, when I was younger, This Week in Geek used to produce a show called These Warriors Are Terrible, which eventually became Terrible Warriors. As far to my knowledge, that was one of the first actual plays created, and we recorded that from 2012 till approximately 2017, and then the other producer, Justin, took over the show for a little while, and now the show is in, I guess you would call it, indefinite hiatus, but episodes should be available on YouTube. But yeah, it's, when I think about high fantasy and other fantastic elements, I had a really good question. Okay. It's an anime question, so you and Ken are now my anime dorks. How would you classify something like, say, Death Note?
Ooh.
Because that's magic permeates everything, but it's only related to the cosmology, because the rest of the world is...
Yeah,
whatever.
Like, that one personally... and there may be some people who will fight me on this, I would actually put that into the low fantasy category.
Okay.
The reason I say this is because, while yes, the Shinigami, the death gods, they can walk on Earth. They can be a...
Direct influence.
Direct influence. But outside of the people who have contact with the Death Notes... Mm-hmm. They are not a known quantity.
Okay, that's fair.
If you look at, and you know what, honestly, again, you've had years to watch this show. You've had decades to watch this show. If you look at when, like, how it actually works. So basically, you write someone's name down in this death note, they die within X amount of time. If you don't put anything in, it's a heart attack. If you put a situation in, it's done by, you know...
Heart attack or whatever.
Well, the situation comes true within reason.
Yeah.
But it takes L and L's successor for the whole series to figure out how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Because the ability of the Death Note,
specific.
Yeah, it's so specific, and it's such an unknown quantity until that knowledge is gained that it's more of a murder mystery than a fantasy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like a murder mystery that has a fantastical element to it.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Like, I don't know. I found as I've gotten older, I'm starting to like fantasy more. Like you mentioned previously, I'm really getting into the Dragonlance stuff, mostly because of my friend Sam and my friend Nick.
Dragonlance is awesome.
Yeah, like I'm really enjoying it, and I'm really surprised because I found, at least in my experience, younger people tend to read more fantasy. As you get older, your taste changes. That's obvious. Whereas I started with Dragonflight and the Harper Hall trilogy from Anne McCaffrey, and then I dropped off. And then only in my 40s have I come back to fantasy. Like, I was very sci-fi based for a really, really long time. Although I've now deciding this phase in my life, Damien, is now airbrush wizard on the side of a van.
Nice.
And I hope that doesn't make me a creep. I just really like fantasy stuff. It's really cool. I really enjoyed the artwork of Larry Elmore, for example. And yeah, I don't know. That's just where I'm at with fantasy. I'm discovering more properties. You've already mentioned The Witcher, Goblin Slayer, so many different anime properties and live action things I should be checking out. I know in terms of movies, we're supposed to get a new Conan. Percy Jackson is on television right now. There's a number of shows on Disney Plus, HBO. You've got tons of options for fantasy right now. Whether you want to watch Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, House of the Dragon is coming out. There's a lot of really good stuff. So I guess, David, in the closing 2 minutes of the show, what are some properties you would recommend? Because I really don't have any other than the obvious water cooler stuff. So thrill me, wizard.
Ooh, okay. So for various levels of fantasy, now some of this, a good chunk of it's probably going to be anime. So you have things that I've mentioned before, such as The Wrong Way to Use Healing Magic, Jack of All Trades, Party of None. Goblin Slayer is another really good one for middle, I'd say middle fantasy. Let's also, I'm gonna actually kind of end this with something that's probably going to be a little controversial. Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire and Queen of the Damned. Low fantasy, vampires. They are a fantastical creature.
I dig it.
Now, myself as Damien, Magical Hack Morphit, and my compatriot here, Mike, the Birdman Ashkaway, would like to thank you for listening to the Spellbook right here on 93.3 CFRU Community Radio.
It's not enough. We have a gallery of villains to look out for, but now we could be infiltrated by a shape changer. I can't even tell if any of you are acting strange because you've been replaced or because this group is full of weirdos.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Spellbook. If you happen to have any comments or suggestions, please send us an email at thespellbookshow@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're hungry for more, you can find Mike at thisweekingeek.net, covering a variety of nerdy topics, and Damien on YouTube at Magical Hack Makes for more TTRPG conversation.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.